The arena shields activated. Human shattered them by accident. The message came on a Tuesday morning. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It arrived like any other transmission. A soft ping on the United Earth Command's main console, flagged as Priority 1. Origin marked as the Galactic Conclave Headquarters, Sector 9. Commander Do-hyun was drinking his third cup of coffee when Lieutenant Yuna placed the printed copy on his desk without saying a word. She just put it down and stepped back, watching his face. He read it once, then again. Then he set the coffee down. The Galactic Conclave, the ruling body of over 300 spacefaring civilizations, was formally inviting humanity to compete in the Grand Arena, the oldest and most respected martial competition in the known galaxy. It had been running for over 6,000 years. Every species that had ever achieved faster-than-light travel had eventually been invited. It was considered both an honor and a test. The way a civilization fought in the arena told the rest of the galaxy everything it needed to know about them. Humanity had been watching from the sidelines for 11 years, ever since first contact. They had been allowed to observe, allowed to learn, allowed to sit quietly and absorb the spectacle of species far older and far more powerful than themselves, throwing each other across a field the size of a small city, all while protected by the legendary Veyrath shields. Now they were being invited to step inside. Do-hyun read the last line of the message 3 times. It said, in very polite and formal galactic standard language, that humanity's participation was of course entirely optional, and that no pressure was being applied. It also said, in slightly smaller text, that no species had ever declined the invitation in 6,000 years. He picked up his coffee again, took a long sip, and said, "Tell them yes." Yuna nodded like she had expected exactly that answer, which she had. The briefing room on Earth Command Station 7 was full of people who looked like they had not slept well. Generals, scientists, diplomats, and 3 different committee chairs had all gathered to discuss humanity's response before anyone had thought to ask Do-hyun what he actually planned to do. When they found out he had already accepted, the room got very quiet for about 4 seconds. Then, everyone started talking at once. Do-hyun sat at the head of the table and let them talk for a while. He was not an impatient man. He was 39 years old, built like someone who had spent 20 of those years doing things that were hard on the body, with short black hair and the kind of calm face that made people either feel reassured or vaguely nervous, depending on who they were. He had commanded 3 deep space operations, negotiated a ceasefire on a colony that was 2 days from open war, and once spent 11 days alone in a disabled shuttle before rescue arrived. He did not panic easily. When the room finally ran low on oxygen from everyone talking, he raised one hand. Silence returned. "We were going to say yes eventually," he said simply. "Every species does. The only question was when. Better to go now, while we choose it, than later when we feel like we have to." One of the generals, a broad-shouldered woman with close-cropped gray hair, leaned forward. "Do we even know what we're walking into? The arena isn't a training exercise. Species have been seriously injured in there. Species have also gained the respect of 300 civilizations in there," Yuna said from her seat near the wall. She had a tablet in her hands and had been pulling data the entire time the others were arguing. "The Veyrath shields make it survivable. Nothing inside the arena can kill a competitor. The shields prevent any fatal outcome. It's violent, but it's controlled." "And we send how many people?" 3, Do-hyun said. Another silence. This one felt heavier. 3, the general repeated. "That's the standard entry. Every species sends a team of 3. It's been that way since the beginning." He paused. "I'll lead. Yuna is my second. For the 3rd spot, I want Junho." Someone at the far end of the table pulled up a file. "Combat Specialist Junho, age 26, decorated. 2 commendations for," the man paused, reading, for improvised solutions under pressure. That's a polite way to put it, Yuna said quietly, almost to herself. Do-hyun's mouth moved in something that might have been a smile. He's good. We'll need good. Nobody argued further. There was not much to argue about. The decision had been made before the meeting started. The room slowly accepted this fact and began moving on to the practical details. What equipment would be permitted, what the travel time would be, how the broadcast rights would work, and whether anyone had contacted Junho yet to tell him he was going. Nobody had. Junho found out the same way he found out most important things. Someone walked up to him while he was doing something else and told him. In this case, he was in the middle of cleaning his service rifle in the equipment bay on sub-level 4, when Yuna appeared in the doorway. She told him. He looked up from the rifle, considered what she had said, looked back down at the rifle, and then said, "Is the food good there?" Yuna stared at him for a moment. The food. At the arena. Is the food good, or do we need to bring our own? I genuinely don't know, she said. Okay. He picked up the cleaning cloth again. I'll pack extra rations. When do we leave? 2 weeks. Good. He held the rifle up to the light, checking the barrel. I'll be ready. Yuna stood in the doorway a moment longer, watching him, then turned and walked away. She made a note in her tablet. Junho, no questions about the arena, the aliens, the competition format, the risk level, or the potential for serious injury. Only asked about food. She underlined it. She was not sure yet whether this made him the calmest person she had ever met, or the most dangerous, possibly both. The ship that carried them was a mid-range diplomatic vessel, clean and quiet, with enough room for the three of them to move without being on top of each other. The journey to the Grand Arena took 9 days. During those 9 days, Do-hyun reviewed every available recording of past arena competitions that had been shared with Earth's databases. Yuna studied the structural schematics of the arena itself, the physics of the Veyrath shields, the patterns of previous matches, and the biological profiles of the species they might face. Junho slept, ate, cleaned his equipment, and on the 6th day asked if anyone wanted to play cards. They did not play cards. When the ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel and the Grand Arena appeared on the view screen, all three of them stopped what they were doing and looked at it. It was enormous. It was ancient. It sat in open space like something that had always been there and always would be. A structure so large it had its own gravitational signature. Thousands of ships orbited it. Broadcast arrays the size of city blocks extended from its outer hull. The Veyrath shields glowed faintly even from a distance, a soft blue haze that wrapped the arena's interior like a second skin. Do-hyun looked at it for a long time. The arena shields activated. Humans shattered them by accident. The docking bay of the Grand Arena was the loudest place Yuna had ever been in her life. She had been to crowded places before. She had walked through the market districts of New Seoul on a holiday weekend, been to 3 different military air bases on active operation days, and once attended a political rally where 200,000 people showed up. She thought she had a reasonable sense of what loud meant. She had been wrong. The docking bay of the Grand Arena held ships from over 300 civilizations, and every single one of those civilizations apparently communicated at high volume. There were sounds she had no words for. Low thrumming calls, sharp clicking sequences, long resonant tones that she felt in her back teeth more than heard with her ears. The gravity was slightly different from Earth's standard. Not enough to be dangerous, but enough to make her feel like she was walking on a ship with a minor engine imbalance. She kept her face calm and her tablet in her hands, and walked exactly 2 steps behind Do-hyun. Their escort was a tall, thin creature with 6 limbs, 4 used for walking, 2 held folded against its upper body, and compound eyes that caught the light in shifting patterns of amber and green. It had introduced itself as Oren, arena referee and official coordinator for new competitor orientation. It spoke Galactic Standard in a voice like dry paper being folded. "You will follow me," Orin had said, and then walked immediately, without waiting to see if they were ready. They followed. It was deep inside the arena's administrative section, a large circular chamber with smooth walls that displayed slow-moving images. Past competitions, Yuna realized, watching a massive four-armed creature trade blows with something that looked like a living storm cloud. The Veyrath shields were visible in every recording, the faint blue haze that wrapped the arena floor, steady and unchanged, regardless of what happened inside. Oron gestured for them to sit. There were chairs sized for human bodies already waiting. Yuna noted this and filed it away. Someone had researched them before they arrived. "The rules of the Grand Arena are as follows," Oron said, moving to stand at the center of the room. Its folded upper limbs spread slightly. A gesture Yuna would later learn was the species equivalent of clearing a throat. "They have not changed in 6,000 years, and they will not change for your species. You will not request modifications." "Wasn't planning to," Do-hyun said. Oren's compound eyes shifted to him briefly. "First, each competing species sends exactly 3 individuals. You have done this correctly." A pause that felt like it might have been approval, or might have been nothing at all. "Second, each competitor fights using only their natural biological capabilities, or their species standard equipment. For biological species with natural weapons, claws, venom, plasma generation, graviton manipulation, those weapons are permitted freely. For species that rely on constructed tools, a standard equipment manifest must be submitted and approved no less than 48 hours before competition." Yuna was already writing. "Third, the Veyrath shields remain active for the entire duration of every match. They are always active. They have been active continuously for 6,000 years. They will prevent any fatal outcome. Serious injury is possible. Death is not." Oren paused again, as if the next part needed its own space. "The shields have never failed." "What are they rated for?" Yuna asked, without looking up from her tablet. Oren's eyes shifted to her. "The energy output equivalent of a small moon's detonation. The figure is largely theoretical, since no competitor has approached that threshold." Yuna wrote it down, underlined it. "And who built them?" "The Veyrath, a civilization that no longer exists. They built the arena, built the shields, and were gone before most of our species developed writing. The shields have required no maintenance in 6,000 years. They are considered permanent." Oren said the last word, the way someone might say the sun will rise tomorrow. It was not a belief. It was simply the nature of things. Yuna wrote, "Permanent, or so they think." Then she looked at what she had written and erased the second part. She did not know why she had written it. After orientation, they were shown to their quarters, a set of 3 connected rooms that were clean, simply furnished, and larger than expected. Do-hyun immediately spread his notes across the main table. Yuna connected her tablet to the room's display system and began pulling up every piece of data the arena's public records system would give her access to. Junho found the room with the food dispensers, confirmed that the food was acceptable, and came back looking satisfied. "It's fine," he said, dropping into a chair. "Not great, but fine." "Good to know," Do-hyun said without looking up. Yuna had the shield schematics on screen. She had been looking at them for 2 hours, and she was developing a headache that had nothing to do with the slightly wrong gravity. The Veyrath shields were not fully understood by modern science. That much was clear from the Conclave's own scientific papers, which she had found in the public database and was reading with increasing interest. The shields operated on a frequency band that no current civilization had been able to fully map. They responded to energy input by reinforcing. The harder something hit them, the stronger they became. They were, in engineering terms, a positive feedback loop that had somehow been perfectly stabilized. "That's not possible," she muttered. "What's not?" Junho asked from his chair, or he had found something to read on a small handheld screen. The shields, the way they work, they absorb energy and use it to reinforce themselves. But a system like that should reach a runaway state and either collapse or explode. The Veyrath solved that problem somehow, and nobody's been able to figure out how. She scrolled through 3 more papers. Every major engineering civilization in the Conclave has studied them. Nobody can reverse engineer the stabilization method. Junho lowered his screen slightly. So they work, but nobody knows why. Essentially. He raised the screen again. Sounds like most things. Yuna looked at him for a moment, then turned back to her own screen. She continued reading. At some point the headache got worse, and she stopped for the night. But the thought stayed with her. A system that nobody fully understood, that had run without interruption for 6,000 years, that everyone had simply decided was permanent because it had always been there. She had spent enough time in engineering to know that always been there was not the same as will always be there. The next 2 days were filled with the administrative work of competition entry. Forms submitted, equipment manifests reviewed, physical evaluations conducted by arena medical staff, who poked and scanned and measured with the focused interest of scientists encountering something new. The human team's biology clearly surprised several of the medical staff, though they said nothing directly. Yuna caught 2 of them having a quiet, rapid conversation while looking at Junho's cardiovascular scan results. On the morning their manifest was due, Dohyun submitted the list of equipment the 3 of them would carry into the arena. The reviewing committee, a panel of 5 senior arena officials from 5 different species, read through it in the order it was presented. Standard military sidearms, combat knives, protective body armor, rated for ballistic and thermal threats, communication equipment, breaching charges, 6 units, compact design, used for rapid entry through reinforced barriers. A 5th item gave the committee pause. One of the officials, a wide, low creature with pale skin and 4 horizontal eyes, leaned toward another and said something quietly in a language the translation system did not catch. The breaching charges, another official said, looking up. These are explosive devices. Correct, Dohyun said. For what purpose are you carrying them into the arena? Dohyun considered this for a moment. They're standard kit. We carry them because they're useful. If we need to anchor a position, clear debris, create a distraction, they have a lot of applications. The committee exchanged another round of quiet looks. Their yield? Yuna gave the technical specifications in calm, professional language. She watched the committee write them down. She watched the numbers land in their understanding and saw the expressions that followed. Not alarm exactly, but something adjacent to it. They were, after all, well below the yield threshold for arena concerns. They barely registered against the scale of what the Veyrath shields were built to handle. The committee moved on. Nobody thought about it further. Across the arena, in the viewing lounges and competitor waiting areas, representatives of other species watched the human team with comfortable amusement. 3 small creatures, soft-bodied, slow by most standards, carrying weapons that looked like toys compared to the natural arsenal of the species they would face. Several betting pools had already been established. Very few of them favored humanity in any category. In their quarters that evening, Dohyun checked his equipment one final time. Yuna reviewed her notes. Junho cleaned his rifle, set it down, and went to sleep at a reasonable hour, like someone with nothing in particular on their mind. The arena shields activated. Humans shattered them, by accident. The arena floor was bigger than it looked from the recordings. Dohyun had watched dozens of matches in the past 9 days. He had studied the distances, the angles, the way competitors moved across the space. And he had calculated in his head what the actual scale felt like from ground level. He had been wrong by a significant margin. Standing on the arena floor, looking up at the tiered seating that curved away on all sides and upward until it blurred into the distance, He understood for the first time why species sometimes froze during their first appearance. It was the simple, physical weight of scale. He adjusted his grip on the weapon at his hip, rolled his shoulders once, and looked straight ahead. The Veyrath's shields were visible as a faint blue haze along the inner perimeter of the arena wall, a continuous, unbroken line of soft light that ran the full circumference of the fighting space. They had been active since before any living thing in the audience had been born. The sound they made was below human hearing, but Yuna had mentioned that the arena's technical documents described it as a continuous low-frequency resonance, a hum that never stopped. The crowd noise was enormous, hundreds of thousands of beings from hundreds of species packed into a space designed to hold them all, and most of them were making some form of sound. Do-hyun did not let himself look at the crowd. He had done that once on the way to the floor, and had immediately decided not to do it again. His earpiece crackled softly. Yuna's voice. His name is Vreth. Krethian subspecies, the armored variant. 8 feet, 4 inches. Estimated mass is 900 kilograms. Natural armor plating along the back and shoulders, approximately 4 centimeters thick. His primary attack pattern in previous matches has been a forward charge followed by a grapple. He is very fast for his size. How fast? Faster than you'd expect. Helpful. His reaction time after a charge commit is slow, about a full second before he can change direction. That's your window. Do-hyun nodded slightly. Across the arena floor, the opposite entry gate was opening. Vreth walked out. The crowd, which had already been loud, got significantly louder. Vreth was not the largest creature Do-hyun had ever seen a recording of, but he was among the most impressive in person. The armored plating Yuna had mentioned covered his upper body in overlapping sections like natural scale armor, dark gray-green in color. He walked on 2 legs, with a slight forward lean, arms hanging loose at his sides, each hand ending in 4 thick fingers with short, blunt claws. His head was low and wide, with a flat face and deep-set eyes that found Do-hyun immediately and did not look away. He stopped about 40 meters out. They looked at each other. Oron's voice came through the arena's broadcast system, calm and procedural, announcing the match in Galactic Standard, and then cycling through 4 other major languages for the audience. Do-hyun caught the part about species, team designations, and the reminder that the Veyrath shields were active, and all competitor safety protocols were in effect. Then the tone sounded. Vreth moved almost immediately. He did not roar or posture or perform. He simply lowered his head and came forward with a speed that made the size of him irrelevant for a full second. He was just a wall of mass, moving very fast in Do-hyun's direction. Do-hyun moved left. He had timed it off Yuna's data, stepping out of the direct line of the charge at the last reasonable moment, letting Vreth's momentum carry him past. The Krethian was fast, but the commitment time was real. He needed almost a full second to reverse direction after a charge, exactly as Yuna had said. Do-hyun used that second to put another 15 meters between them and reassess. Vreth turned. He looked at Do-hyun with what appeared to be mild interest. Then he came again. They went through this 4 more times. Each time Do-hyun moved, each time Vreth adjusted, each time the gap between them changed slightly. The crowd was not cheering the way it had when Vreth entered. It was watching with the focused quiet of an audience that was trying to figure out what it was seeing. A human being moved differently than anything else that had fought in the arena. Not faster, not stronger, just differently. There was a quality to the movement that several xenobiologists in the viewing section would later describe in their notes as economical, and one would describe, after a long pause, as patient. Vreth slowed after the 5th charge. He was not tired. His species did not tire that quickly, but he was recalibrating. He had expected the human to fold by now. They always did, the smaller species. Size and force won in the arena because the shields made death impossible. And so the winning condition was simply endurance. Keep hitting until the other thing stopped moving. The human had not stopped moving. Vreth tried a different approach. He moved more slowly, circling, forcing Do-hyun to keep turning. He did not run. He kept his eyes on Vreth, and moved in a slow circle that matched the Krethian's rotation, always facing him, never giving up the angle. In the viewing gallery, several conclave representatives watched, with expressions that were hard to read. It was during the seventh exchange, Vreth charging, Do-hyun moving to the side, that the problem of the arena floor became relevant. The floor surface was designed for multiple species, and was therefore a compromise. Smooth enough for various limb configurations, but with a slight give that helped absorb impact force. For most species, this was a non-issue. For a human moving quickly on a lateral cut, while wearing boots designed for terrestrial use on standard Earth gravity surfaces, it created a traction variable that Do-hyun's body registered about half a second before his conscious mind did. Not badly, not enough to fall, but enough to shift his weight wrong at the moment he needed it right. He caught himself, but it took one extra second, and in that second, Vreth was close enough that backing further away was not an option. Do-hyun made a decision. He pulled the breaching charge from the front of his vest. Not as a weapon. It had never crossed his mind to use it as a weapon, because that was not what a breaching charge was for. A breaching charge was a tool with a specific mechanical function, and the function he needed right now was its secondary application as an anchor point. In collapsed structure rescue operations and certain military entry scenarios, breaching charges were sometimes fixed to a surface and used to create an anchor point that a soldier could brace against. The detonation was directional, and the reaction force could be used to stabilize a position or absorb a controlled impact. He fixed the charge to the arena floor, stepped back exactly the recommended distance, and triggered it. The charge performed exactly as designed. The directional detonation went downward and outward at the calculated angle. The reaction force pushed back upward and gave Do-hyun the brace point he needed. He stabilized. It took about half a second. It worked. He was stable. Vreth pulled up, recalibrated again, and they resumed their standoff. Standard procedure. A textbook secondary application of standard human military equipment. The charge's energy output, however, had struck the arena floor at a specific angle, at a specific velocity, and had produced a shock wave that traveled outward through the floor material and then upward into the air in a spreading cone. And the cone, at its upper edge, touched the Veyrath's shield wall. The shockwave frequency was not particularly powerful. It was a fraction of the yield the shields had been built to handle. In any normal calculation, it was completely irrelevant. But it struck at a resonance frequency. Not intentionally, not because anyone had calculated it, not because any human engineer had ever studied the Veyrath's shields and worked backward to find their harmonic weak point. It was an accident of angle and surface material, and the specific acoustic properties of the arena floor, and the particular frequency the breaching charge happened to produce on that particular day. The resonance hit the shield at the exact frequency that, had anyone ever thought to look for it, would have been identified as the one point where the Veyrath stabilization method could not compensate fast enough. The shield wall flickered. Then a crack appeared. Not a crack in a material sense. The shields were not solid, but a visible disruption, a line where the blue haze became uneven and dark, spreading from the point of contact outward in both directions. The crack spread. Then the entire eastern panel of the Grand Arena's Veyrath shield, a structure that had stood continuously for 10,000 years, that had survived energy outputs equivalent to stellar events, that 300 civilizations had examined and declared physically permanent, came apart. Not explosively, not dramatically. It simply lost coherence. The blue haze flickered rapidly, twice, and then dissolved into nothing. The space where the shield had been was now just open air. Silence followed. Total, absolute, complete silence. 300,000 beings in the stands of the grand arena did not make a single sound, for a period that to those present felt like a very long time. Technical instruments later confirmed it was approximately 11 seconds. Do-hyun, standing on the arena floor in a stable position with his equipment in hand, looked at the space where the eastern shield had been. Then he looked at Vreth, who was also looking at the space where the eastern shield had been. Then he looked at the breaching charge casing on the floor beside him, standard issue, compact, entry-level ordnance, completely expended and inert. And then back at the space where the shield had been. "Yuna," he said quietly into his earpiece. A very long pause. "I saw it," she said. "Did I?" "Yes." Another pause. "Was I supposed to be able to do that?" Yuna's voice, when it came back, was extremely controlled. "No, no." Across the arena floor, Vreth was still looking at the gap in the shield wall, with the expression of a being whose understanding of the world had just quietly reorganized itself around a new and unwelcome fact. Do-hyun stood in the middle of the arena floor, in front of a 900-kilogram armored alien that had been trying to physically dismantle him 30 seconds ago. And the armored alien was no longer looking at him. Nobody in the grand arena was looking at Vreth. The arena shields activated. Humans shattered them by accident. The first thing Oren did was declare an emergency recess. This had never happened before. In 6,000 years of grand arena competition, no referee had ever stopped a match mid-floor for reasons other than a competitor requesting yield or a medical situation. The process for declaring an emergency recess was buried so deep in the arena's administrative rulebook that 3 of the senior officials had to look it up while it was happening. Oren's voice came through the broadcast system, flat and calm, which was impressive given that every one of Oren's 6 limbs was moving in small, agitated ways that the audience close enough to see the referee's position would later describe as visibly shaken. The announcement said that competition was suspended pending a technical review. It thanked the audience for their patience. It said nothing about the shield. Everyone could see the shield was gone. Thanking the audience for their patience was a remarkable thing to do, when several thousand species representatives in the viewing galleries were currently gripping their seats or whatever structure was nearest to them, and making sounds that translated roughly as, "What just happened?" Do-hyun was escorted off the arena floor by 4 officials, who appeared to have been selected more for their proximity to the exit than for any official authority they held. The match with Vreth was paused. Vreth himself walked off the opposite side of the floor without being asked, moving with the careful, quiet energy of someone who had suddenly decided they had somewhere else to be. The holding area they put Do-hyun in was a plain room with a table and chairs. It was not uncomfortable. It was not a cell. The officials who brought him there were extremely polite in the way that beings are polite when they are frightened and trying very hard not to show it. They offered him water. They told him the review would not take long. They left. Yuna and Junho arrived 3 minutes later. Nobody stopped them. Yuna sat down immediately and opened her tablet. Junho looked around the room, found another chair, pulled it up, and sat down. "You okay?" Junho asked Do-hyun. "Fine." Do-hyun sat with his arms resting on the table, looking at the opposite wall. "You see it happen?" "Saw the broadcast cut out, then the shield just—" Junho made a gesture with his hand, fingers spreading outward and then opening flat. "Gone." "Yeah." A short silence. "You want the rest of my ration bar?" Junho reached into a pocket. "I grabbed one on the way out." "No." "Okay." Junho ate it himself. Yuna had not looked up from her tablet since sitting down. She was reading fast, her eyes moving across the screen with the focused speed of someone who had found something important, and was trying to understand it before anyone asked her to explain it. The silence in the room was the kind that had a lot of thinking happening inside it. After about 10 minutes, she put the tablet flat on the table and pressed both hands on top of it. "The charge hit a resonance frequency," she said. Both men looked at her. "The Veyrath shields don't fail under force. That's why they've lasted this long. Anything that hits them just makes them stronger." But there was a theoretical resonance weakness identified in a conclave scientific paper written about 300 years ago. The author said it was a non-issue, because the specific frequency required would only be produced by a very particular combination of surface material, angle of impact, and yield range that no competitor had ever produced. She paused. Breaching charges, in that specific deployment configuration, on that floor material, at that angle, produce exactly that frequency. Do-hyun absorbed this. Nobody checked for that? Nobody ever checked for it because nobody ever deployed a breaching charge as an anchor point inside the arena before. It's not a weapon. It wasn't flagged as a risk. It was approved on the manifest without a second look. The paper that identified the theoretical weakness was written by a Dravathi physicist who concluded his own research by saying, and I'm translating from Galactic Standard, roughly, "The conditions required are so specific and so unlikely to occur in any arena scenario, that this finding is of purely academic interest." Another silence. "Purely academic," Do-hyun repeated, "until today." The shield engineers arrived in waves. The first group came from the arena's own technical staff. 12 engineers from 4 different species, carrying equipment that Yuna recognized as high-resolution resonance scanners. They went straight to the gap in the eastern shield wall and began working immediately, not speaking to anyone, not looking at anyone, moving with the focused intensity of people who had encountered something impossible and were attempting to find the error in their instruments before accepting that the instruments were correct. The instruments were correct. The second group arrived 2 hours later. Independent specialists called in by the Conclave's Emergency Technical Committee, which had been convened in a meeting room somewhere above the arena floor. This group was larger, from more species, and carried even more equipment. They also went straight to the gap. They also found the same result. The shield wall's eastern section was not damaged, or weakened, or disrupted. The energy structure that had maintained it for 10,000 years had come apart at the resonance point and had not reformed. The question of whether it could reform was, based on the expressions of the engineers involved, not a comfortable one. In the meeting room above, the Conclave's Emergency Technical Committee was asking questions in a large number of languages simultaneously. The chief arena engineer, a very old being from a species that had been studying the shields for over 2,000 years, was answering those questions with the pained patience of someone who was correct about something they deeply wished they were wrong about. The shields were not simply down. The stabilization mechanism, the part that no civilization had ever successfully reverse-engineered, appeared to have been disrupted at its core resonance point. The other sections of the shield were still active. The western, northern, and southern panels were functioning normally. But the eastern panel was gone, and the disruption in the resonance field was propagating very slowly outward from the breach point, like a crack moving through glass in slow motion. If nothing was done, the committee was being told, the remaining panels would follow. On a timeline of approximately 6 to 9 days. Mireille had not been on the arena floor, and had not been in the holding room, and had not been anywhere particularly useful during the first hours after the incident. She had been in the diplomatic observation gallery with the other human liaison staff, doing the work of a liaison, watching, recording, translating, and maintaining the quiet, steady background presence that kept communication lines open between humanity and the Conclave. When the shield came down, she had been mid-conversation with a Dravathi cultural attaché about trade route mapping. The Dravathi attaché had stopped speaking mid-sentence, stared at the arena floor for 11 seconds along with everyone else, and then slowly turned to look at Mireille. Mireille had spent 7 years building diplomatic relationships with the Galactic Conclave on the basis that humanity was manageable. That was the word she had used in her official reports and in her informal conversations and in the careful, steady work of 200 small negotiations and 4 larger ones. Manageable. Not powerful, not threatening, new and eager to learn, and fundamentally manageable. She looked at the space where the eastern shield used to be. Then she put her hands over her face and stood very still for a while. Her assistant, a young man named Wanjun, who had been with her for 2 years and had heard her describe humanity as manageable approximately 600 times, stood beside her and said nothing. He had the look of someone who had just watched a very large and carefully built structure develop a significant problem, and did not yet know how to help fix it. After a moment, Mireille lowered her hands and said, "Where is Do-hyun?" "Holding room, level 4. "And Yuna?" "Same room." "And Junho?" "Also same room." "Fine." She straightened her jacket. "I need to go explain to 17 diplomatic delegations that this was an accident before any of them reach a different conclusion." Wanjun fell in beside her. "What should I tell the Dravathi attaché?" "Tell him I'll finish our conversation later." She paused. "Tell him humanity is still very much interested in trade route cooperation, and this afternoon has not changed that." Another pause. "Tell him that sincerely." Wanjun nodded and went to do this. The Conclave Science Panel requested to meet with Yuna at hour 4. They were a group of 9, from 9 different species, all holding some version of a senior research credential, and they filed into the meeting room with the energy of people who had many questions and were not entirely sure they wanted the answers. Yuna walked them through the breaching charge. She explained its standard function, its secondary applications, its yield specifications, and its deployment procedure. She used the words standard issue and entry-level ordnance several times because those were the accurate terms, and accuracy mattered. She watched the panel write things down. She watched the numbers produce reactions. The Conclave's lead physicist, a being with 4 arms, 2 of which held writing instruments, and 2 of which appeared to be holding the edge of the table, asked, "And this device is carried as a matter of routine by your military personnel?" "Yes." "In what quantities?" "Standard load is 6 per soldier." Do-hyun carried 6. "And your military has how many soldiers?" Yuna told him. The physicist wrote the number down, and then looked at it for a moment longer than necessary. "The entry-level designation," said another panel member carefully. "This implies there are non-entry-level versions." "Yes, higher yield variants, specialized applications." "How much higher in yield?" Yuna told him that too. The room got quieter. Several panel members exchanged looks that contained a large amount of unspoken communication. Yuna sat with her hands folded on the table and waited. She had answered every question directly and completely, because those were the facts, and the facts were what they were. Down the corridor in the plane holding room, Juno had found a second ration bar somewhere and was eating it. He had asked Do-hyun twice if there was anything useful he should be doing, and both times Do-hyun had said no, just wait. He had found a small screen on the wall that appeared to be cycling through arena historical highlights, and he was watching it with mild interest. He watched a species with 6 legs defeat something enormous in an impressively fast match. He watched another match where 2 creatures approximately the size of buildings moved with surprising speed. He watched a third match that he could not fully follow because the physics of it were not quite what he expected. He finished the ration bar. He watched another match. He remained entirely unaware that 7 different conclave science committees were currently in emergency session, partly because of something he had done earlier that afternoon, with a piece of equipment he considered unremarkable. Some people, it has been observed, carry the weight of a historical moment very lightly, mostly because they have not yet been told how heavy it is. The arena shields activated. Human shattered them by accident. They fixed the shields, Eventually, it took 9 days, 4 complete engineering teams from 3 different civilizations, technology that had to be invented specifically for this purpose, and one very long meeting where the Conclave's senior technical body argued about whether what they were building was actually a repair or simply a replacement. In the end, they decided the distinction did not matter as much as the result. The new shields were different from the old ones. They were triple-layered, built on overlapping resonance frequencies specifically chosen to avoid the harmonic weakness that the Dravathi physicist had identified 300 years ago, and everyone had subsequently ignored. The energy output they were rated for went considerably beyond the previous specification. The engineers who built them were thorough and careful, and deeply motivated by recent events. It was, Yuna noted when she reviewed the technical specifications, genuinely impressive work done under difficult conditions in a short amount of time. It was also the first significant piece of new Veyrath-class engineering any civilization had produced in 6,000 years. Humanity had caused it by accident. She decided not to put that in her official report, and then decided it was a fact, and facts belonged in reports, and put it back in. The competition resumed on day 10. The crowd on resumption day was larger than any previous arena event in recorded history. Ships had been arriving in the days since the incident, species that had not originally planned to attend, beings who had watched the broadcast and then made the journey specifically because of what had happened. The overflow viewing areas, which had not been used in decades, were also full. Several thousand beings who could not get viewing access at all were watching on broadcast from their ships in the surrounding orbital space. Oron announced the resumption in Galactic Standard, and then, because everyone was already thinking about it, stated clearly and for the record that the Veyrath shields were active, had been tested, and were functioning correctly. The audience response to this announcement was a very large sound that was technically applause, but felt like relief. Then Do-hyun walked back onto the arena floor. The response to that was something different. Not cheering exactly, not the kind of cheering Vreth had received on the first day, loud and celebratory and simple. This was a more complicated sound. Several 100,000 beings from several hundred different civilizations, each of whom had spent the last 9 days thinking about what they had seen, producing a reaction that contained admiration and uncertainty and a very large amount of recalibration all at once. Do-hyun walked to the center of the floor, stopped, and waited. Across from him, Vreth's gate opened. There was a pause. Then Vreth walked out. He moved differently than he had on the first day. Not slower exactly, but more considered, more deliberate. He stopped at his starting position and looked at Do-hyun across 40 meters of arena floor, and what was on his face was harder to read than before. Oren announced the match continuation. The tone sounded. It lasted 31 seconds. Vreth moved forward, not a charge this time, a controlled approach, and got to about 15 meters when he stopped. He stood there looking at Do-hyun, who was looking back at him. Do-hyun had not moved. He had not reached for anything. He was simply standing in a relaxed, ready position, watching. Vreth looked at him for a long moment. Then he lowered his head and brought his fists together in front of his chest, the Krethian gesture of yield. It was a clean motion, practiced and deliberate. He held it for 3 full seconds, and then straightened and walked back toward his gate without looking back. The crowd sound this time was enormous. Oren recorded the yield and announced Do-hyun's advancement in the bracket. The arena's own analytics system, which had been calculating win probabilities since the competition began, had placed humanity's odds of winning a single match at 14%. Nobody publicly said what it was revised to, but several of the beings responsible for the arena's betting pools had a very unpleasant hour immediately after. In the gallery, Mireille watched Do-hyun walk off the floor and let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 9 days. Beside her, Wonjun was writing something quickly in his notes. "What are you writing?" she asked. "The statement you're going to have to give the press in an hour," he said. She looked at him. "What does it say?" He showed her. It said, "Humanity is honored by the opportunity to compete in the grand arena and considers the events of the past week to be a learning experience for all involved parties." Mireille read it. "That's very diplomatic." "I've been learning from the best," he replied. "Add something about our ongoing commitment to cooperation with the conclave." Already in the second paragraph. She turned back to the arena floor, where the cleanup crews were beginning to prep for the next match. Somewhere below, Do-hyun was probably filling out paperwork. Yuna was probably already researching the next opponent. Junho was probably looking for food. The classification change happened quietly. There was no announcement, no ceremony, no formal presentation. A document was filed in the Conclave's administrative system 4 days after the shield incident, under a category heading that had not been used in 3,000 years, Unrestricted Division. The category existed because some species historically required it. Not because they were large, or fast, or naturally armed with weapons of significant yield. Not because they were ancient or powerful, or had long histories of galactic dominance. The Unrestricted Division existed for species that could not be safely categorized by the standard threat assessment framework. Species that produced outcomes the framework was not designed to anticipate. Humanity was the first species moved into the Unrestricted Division in 3,000 years. The previous occupant had been the Veyrath themselves. The document noting this fact was written in very careful neutral language that said nothing about why this comparison might be significant. Several of the beings who read it decided they needed to sit down for a while. Mireille found out about the reclassification from Wonjun, who had found it in the administrative feed. She read the document twice. She read the part about the Veyrath twice more. She closed the file and sat with it for a long time. Then she sent a brief, personal message to Do-hyun. It said, "Do you know what category they've put us in?" It said, "Yuna told me. Are you okay?" She considered the question. She wrote back, "I'm fine. I'm adjusting." His reply, "That's what we do." She looked at that for a moment. Then she closed the message and went back to work. Yuna framed the shield collapse incident report and hung it in the ship's mess hall on the return voyage. It was not the official report. That had been filed with Earth Command in 14 copies, and would spend years being read and analyzed and discussed by people whose job it was to read and analyze and discuss things. This was a printed copy of the key technical finding. 1 page, the part that explained in plain language what had happened and why. She printed it on standard paper, found a simple frame in the ship's supply storage, and put it on the wall next to the coffee machine, where everyone would see it every morning. Junho looked at it the first morning. He stood in front of it for a while, drinking coffee, reading it. Then he looked at Yuna. "This is about my charge," he said. "Yes." He looked at the paper again. "I was using it as an anchor point." "Yes." "And it broke the shield." "Yes." He looked at it for another moment. "Huh." He drank his coffee, he went and sat down and ate breakfast. Yuna watched him. She had expected a stronger reaction, and then realized she did not know why she had expected that. Junho's relationship with consequential events had always been the same. He processed them, confirmed the facts, and moved forward. It was a quality that she had found mildly baffling for the first year she had known him, and had come to understand after the arena as something closer to a specific form of intelligence. Not the intelligence of analysis or strategy, but the intelligence of proportion. Knowing instinctively how much energy a situation deserved, and spending exactly that much on it. He had used a breaching charge to solve an immediate problem. The problem had been solved. That a 10,000-year-old energy structure had also come apart as a side effect was significant, yes. But it was not something he had done on purpose, and it was not something worrying about would change. The shield was gone. The new shields were built. They were going home. That was the whole of it, as far as Junho was concerned. The universe, in Junho's experience, was full of things that happened by accident. Most of them mattered less than they seemed to at first. You dealt with what was in front of you, and you kept moving. The impact on the wider galaxy was slower to unfold, but larger. In the months that followed the Grand Arena incident, 17 different research programs were launched across various conclave civilizations to study the resonance vulnerability the breach had exposed. Most of them produced papers with careful, measured language and a large number of equations. 2 of them produced papers with considerably less measured language. One paper, written by a junior researcher from a species that Yuna had never heard of before seeing it cited, was titled simply, "What Humans Carry as Standard Equipment, a Survey." It became, within 6 months, one of the most widely distributed scientific documents in conclave history. 3 different species initiated formal diplomatic contact with Earth in the wake of the competition. 2 of them had previously shown no particular interest in engaging with humanity beyond the required minimum of conclave protocol. Their communication requests were warm, specific, and mentioned the Grand Arena. The arena itself changed the competition format for new species entries, not eliminating the event, but adding a more thorough equipment review process that examined secondary applications in addition to primary ones. The new protocol was quietly referred to in arena administration as the human audit. Nobody put that name in any official document. Everyone used it anyway. Oron filed the final incident report in Oron's capacity as referee on the last day of the competition. It was a long document, thorough and precise, as all Oron's reports had always been. The final paragraph, which was technically outside the standard required sections, and was therefore Oron's own addition, read, in Yuna's translation, from Galactic Standard. In 6,000 years of arena competition, this office has observed beings of extraordinary power, ancient civilizations, and species whose natural capabilities exceed the comprehension of others. This incident represents the first time that an outcome of significant galactic consequence was produced by a competitor performing a routine action with a tool they considered unremarkable. The shields have always been described as permanent. The humans did not know this. It is my conclusion that the humans not knowing is, itself, relevant data. The report was filed. It was read by a great number of beings in positions of responsibility. It was discussed in rooms that Do-hyun and Yuna and Junho would never enter, in languages they did not speak, by beings whose names they would never learn. And in 1,000 safety manuals across 1,000 civilizations, engineers began adding a new line to their threat assessment frameworks. The wording varied by species and language, but the meaning was consistent. It said, account for humans performing routine actions in proximity to critical systems. It said, standard equipment is relative. It said, they will not know what they have done until after they have done it. It said in the most carefully worded version, the one that would eventually become the standard phrasing across most of the conclave's engineering bodies. When calculating risk tolerance for sensitive structures, include a human factor. Define as the probability that a human being doing something ordinary will produce an outcome that no prior analysis considered possible. They did not mean to break it. That was, as Oren had observed, the part that mattered most.